Welcome to another episode of the Backstage Creative. My name is Krista Copper. This podcast is all about the people who work behind the scenes of theater. Each week, I interview someone who stage manages or designs or is a musician or music director or choreographs. There's so many roles that need to be played that go on behind the scenes of theater in order to get a live production up on stage. And it is my pleasure and my honor to talk to some of these people. And today is my interview with Scott Thornton. Scott is a bass player like myself. When I started this podcast, I was like, oh man, I'm going to interview all these bass players who play for all these shows. And I was like, wait a minute, Krista, calm down. This isn't a podcast just about bass players. And so I've limited myself to 2 bass players a year. So Scott is the first bass player for 2020. And later this year, hopefully I'll be able to have another one on the show. Before we get into this episode, I did want to take a quick minute and just talk about how I choose guests for my show. I try really hard to reach out to a variety of different people. Not everyone who I reach out to is willing to be on the show or gets back to me. Some people I think are uncomfortable with being interviewed, which I totally understand because it can be kind of nerve-wracking. And some people just don't get back to me, which is fine as well. So I would like to have more diversity on this show. I would love it if I could have, all of the genders and races and all of the jobs equally represented through these interviews, but that's just that's not possible to have everything equal and equally represented. I try my best, but again, I can't control who gets back to me. It's something that I'm striving towards, and it's something that I'm aware of as I reach out to people, and I'm always looking for people who I feel have been underrepresented, both in the theater world and on my show. And then it's up to them if they get back to me. So just know that I am striving for diversity, and I am striving for featuring as many different people and as I possibly can. Let's get into this interview with Scott Thornton because it's a good one. So here we go. Here's my interview with bassist Scott Thornton. Awesome. How's everything going?
Well, we're okay. My wife and I are healthy and safe, and we have been the whole time. So that's the main thing. So How about yourself?
Meh. I mean, like I'm healthy too, but I miss work. I miss making music with other people for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's rough on everybody.
Yeah,
for sure, and especially though, I mean, I'm lucky I have a full-time job that I'm 99% sure is going to be there when it opens. But yeah, a lot of freelancers are really struggling with what to do these days. So yeah, it's tough.
That freelance life, like, I don't know if it'll ever be the same. There's always an amount of risk, when you're a freelancer, but now it's just, I think there's a lot of fear going into that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So take us through. Let's start with Chicago. You're the tuba and bass chair in that show.
Yes.
What's playing the show like? What's playing 2 really big instruments night after night like?
I mean, the show now is as of 2 months ago, is great. I mean, it's such a, everybody there is super cool, and the band is amazing. It's like all like famous people, or have formerly famous people in the band, sort of, that have played all these big jazz gigs and stuff like that. So it's an honor to be there, and it's a great situation to be in. We're on stage the whole time, so we kind of see the whole show every night and get to see the audience and get to laugh along with the actors and everything like that. So yeah, it's good. Playing bass and tuba, there's a house bass there.
Oh, good.
So that sits up in the on stage, put it in the corner of my little section that I'm in, and stays there. And I have a tuba that since I started subbing there like 9 years ago, I guess. I've just left a tuba there. Like, I would always have to take it down to, well, what is actually the pit is now where we store stuff. So I would put the tuba down there, but now I actually leave it on stage unless I'm going to be subbing out or something. So I really don't have to carry that much of the big instruments very often. So that's another benefit of being there. So yeah, so that's all good.
So as a fellow bass player, how does that work when do you have your bass like on a stand? And so when you're switching Like, I'm just imagining like the choreography of going between those instruments.
Yeah, it's actually it's kind of built in. There's a kind of a corner set up. You just place it front first into a corner,
Mm,
and so
mhm.
everything's black. The bass itself, they had laminated black back, whatever, 24 years ago or whatever it was.
Okay.
It's a K. I have it, and it's the same sizing as a K that I have, so that's easy to play. Yeah, but I just put it into basically a corner and turn around to the other side of my stool and pick up the tuba and play. So I use the same stand for both instruments, obviously.
Mhm. Oh, so you're sitting the whole time?
I actually stand to play bass,
Mhm.
which is better for my. I mean, I always stand. I'm not a stool player. Or
Mhm.
you play with a stool, or you mostly stand, or
No, stools hurt, like, I can't get
yeah,
comfortable.
yeah. I don't like. I mean, I'm sure at first it was the decision was based on do I want to always carry a stool around or not, and I thought
Yeah.
no, I don't want to carry a stool around. But it's actually I prefer not to. It's nice to be able to stand and straighten out my back for that part of the show. And yeah, there's a stool, a comfortable stool that I sit with the tuba on. So yeah, I do both. So yeah,
Mhm. What are characteristics of, like, a really good pit? You know, when people say, "Oh, the pit is so good," or, you know, "This is one of the best pits I've ever played in." What makes a really good pit orchestra or pit band?
I've been lucky. All the shows that I've played in have been. I mean, I'm sure pretty much all are these days. Everybody's all is great. You hear some stories of back in the day, like when Chorus Line opened, it was really bad orchestra. But other than that, it's mostly good players. So that's the main thing. I mean, just being around great players is the main thing. Being around players that are great and also very nice and kind and helpful is great. Musically, I mean, the music director is important. Just it's a lot, mostly listening, adjusting to whatever you need to do. The time feel in that band is great. I mean, it's all these serious jazz musicians. I mean, people that have spent the earlier days playing with like Woody Herman and Buddy Rich and Blood, Sweat, and Tears and all this stuff. I mean, it's all these famous, sort of formerly semi-famous band people. So the time is really good, and that's important. And yeah, it's just the musicianship and the conductor that we have right now for the last year or so is great. Very happy. Just all that stuff, just between personalities and musically, like listening to each other. I don't know. I'm not sure what else could be better. Yeah.
Yeah, I've played in, man, so many different pit situations where you get people who have really good feel, but they're kind of jackasses in the
Yeah.
green room, and you
Yeah.
get
Yeah. Yeah.
people
Yeah.
who are so nice but can't play in the feel that, you know, you and the drummer are laying down to save their life.
Yeah. And every once in a while, of course, you run into sometimes not all. Most of the subs are good. They're not always as great as the regular player. Sometimes they're maybe even a little better, but yeah, every once in a while you find something that's not perfect, but everybody else makes up for it. Like this is such a great feel for like the jazz, mostly jazz, older style big band
Hmm.
stuff that we do. And I did like a year ago, I've spent like a lot of time at My Fair Lady at Lincoln Center, and that was just all these super serious classical players that do all these the most famous they sub or play in the big orchestras in town, like the ballets and the this and that Orpheus and all this stuff. And that was just a whole other thing. But they were still basically very nice, not as stuffy as you might think, like very nice people and just an honor to play with in a completely different style.
Hmm.
So yeah, I've been lucky to play with a lot of good groups.
Yeah, I think that's one of the fun things, at least for me, with playing in the pit, is you meet, you know, like classical trained people, you know, people who come up in the jazz tradition, some
Yeah,
people who didn't go to college, some people who are largely self-taught. I mean, I think theater attracts such a wide
yeah,
range of musicians. It's really, you get to learn a lot because you're
yes,
involved with so many people from so many different backgrounds.
yes,
Yeah.
true.
So take us through your background, where you're from, how you got into music, where you went to school, and how you ended up on Broadway.
Well, that could be a whole hour right there, probably. No, I'm just kidding. No, not really. It'd be a very boring hour, though. Sorry. Uh, actually, I grew up in a small. Well, not I thought it was a big town, but it's actually a small town. I grew up in the state of North Dakota in a town called Dickinson, which is actually the fifth largest town there, but it wasn't very big. My dad was the high school band director, and I'm the youngest of six siblings, and every one of them is a musician. Every one of them, at some point, has been a professional musician, and everyone except for me has been an educator also. A couple are retired already, and everybody else is like teaching in different contexts, universities and that sort of thing. I was younger than everybody for sure, so I had like all these mentors
Mm-hmm.
to just learn from. All slightly different, different instruments, different skill sets, different styles that they like to play, jazz and classical, and I was just able to learn. Have a base for learning from then. I went to a couple of years. I used to be a French horn. I was a French horn major at first. That's what I did. Honestly, I peaked. My French horn playing peaked in high school. It really, it wasn't. It's not really built for my face. I did pretty well. My senior year in high school, I actually won a national solo competition, the
Cool.
MTNA solo brass competition. But then that's I kind of started getting worse after that. In a way, I went to school in University of Iowa for 2 years, and I was used to kind of being a big fish in a small pond, and I was probably overly conceited. I did not get along with my teacher, who was an older guy, probably about ready to retire, and just had very strict ways of teaching stuff, and that really wasn't going that well. And I started to get into jazz. Then I had played electric bass in high school in the jazz band, and I started to pick up acoustic bass because there's a jazz bass player named Charlie Hayden. You must know who he
Mm-hmm.
is, of course.
Yeah.
He came and did some clinics and stuff. And at that point, I was just playing like a fretless bass. And of course, he would say this to anybody, I realized, but he said, "Oh, you should really also play acoustic bass, learn." So I took that to heart, even though he would have told that to everybody, I'm sure. But I took that to heart and I started playing acoustic bass, and I was doing that the whole time. And I was just there for a couple of years, and then I transferred up to the University of Minnesota, which was both good, very good music schools. University of Iowa was more very creative type stuff. I was getting into like avant-garde freeform jazz and that sort of things. And University of Minnesota was very strict, like time, old school. So I got a good combination between those two of different jazz styles and doing classical horn the whole time. I studied with a couple of the horn players from the Minnesota Orchestra. I was still struggling with it, but I was trying, and they taught me. They took me through lots of problem solving things to try to get me back online, which has helped me. I kind of fizzled out on the horn, and I just picked up. I just decided, I remember I had a techniques class in school, and I picked up a tuba, and I immediately sounded better than I did on horn. Yeah, so I just picked up a tuba and started playing, and honestly, just kind of transferred all the knowledge to tuba. And all this time, I was playing bass. I had studied bass in Minneapolis with the principal of the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra at that time, Chris Brown. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if you know who he is. So
Mm-hmm.
that was helpful. He basically turned me from a pure jazz bass player into a decent classical player at that time. And then I just kept working on that after that. Let's see what else. And then I went to University of Connecticut, and I actually went there for conducting, like orchestral conducting, to study that, just because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was kind of a tough couple of years. My bass playing kind of fell apart. I wasn't really playing bass then, that sort of thing. But I learned a lot about score study and stuff like that. And I took some lessons with a bass soloist who was teaching there, Robert Black.
That's who I studied with.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Where
Yeah.
where was that?
At the Hart School for my
Oh,
master's.
okay. Oh, okay. When were you? I was there. I guess he was teaching. I was at University of Connecticut just for a
Mm.
couple of years, and yeah, he was
Mm-hmm.
teaching there. He had a big bass studio there. I remember there's lots of students.
Mm-hmm.
Is he still teaching there?
No, I think Greg August is at
Oh,
University of
okay.
Connecticut. I think Robert's just at Hart. He might do some stuff at NYU, but or Manhattan School of Music, maybe. I don't
Okay.
know.
Okay. And then I moved to New York, and I was struggling. I didn't have that many connections, and it took me a long time to get set up. I actually had to work the first few years like a Wall Street type job, not a good Wall Street job, just a crappy like Wall Street job, just to start paying off my student loans and stuff like that. And kept playing, tried to get my playing better and better. And then I wasn't doing that, but I actually taught tennis part time for the last 20 years, up until about 5, 6, 7 years ago, just as a day job, and then gradually picked up music work. So kind of a strange progression, but I made it somehow.
Yeah, I don't think anyone has like what is even a normal progression in the music world, you know?
Exactly.
How do you think having that conducting background has helped you play in the pit?
Well, I just depends on the pit. Yeah, just because I'm so used to knowing what a conductor's giving and doing, it's very helpful in more the classically oriented things like My Fair Lady and Miss Saigon, where there was a lot of crazy stuff going on. It was easy for me to pick up stuff, and I know what to listen for. Yeah, just I mean, it just helps me fit in watching the conductor, which I've always done anyway because I'm just classically trained. My dad was band director, so no, just being in tune with what's going on a little better, knowing what to look for, knowing what they're looking for.
When you got to New York, how did you start making connections?
Very slowly. I knew. I mean, a drummer friend of mine had moved here just a year or two before that. Did a few sessions with him. Another bass player friend from way back in University of Iowa was here. I got together with him once in a while, and just yeah, I started playing. I kind of came here to at that time I was really interested in being a jazz bass player, and that's what I wanted to do. So I started doing more sessions and getting just this typical crappy jazz gigs that you do, just enough. You get like at that time back in the mid or late mid 90s or something, you were happy to get $30 in a meal and some coffee or something. It's just started there, and just kind of picked. Then I got I guess I got invited to do this play in like a community orchestra as like a ringer or something, and I just kind of picked it up from there and started meeting people, other players, more professional people, and people were recommended me for better and better things. So it was very long, slow process. Honestly, it was not like an easy thing, but I survived it and I stayed in town. And as soon as I get a vaccine, I'll be ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah, it does take a long time to build a network. I've also found that in my life. Were you ever like frustrated, like when maybe you wanted to get better gigs and it wasn't happening, or you wanted to be able to make more connections and it wasn't happening? Was that process ever frustrating for you?
Oh yeah, I mean it's always frustrating, and I mean honestly, like as a musician, I feel like I've been passed over for like 95% of the gigs I would want to have. I
Mm.
wasn't the guy that got the gig, but and that's still what happened. There's still stuff I see. Oh, I see something going on. I thought, oh, why didn't I get called for that? I could have been perfect for that. But that's just standard. You have to put up with that. I had to do other things to make enough money to stay here, and I was okay. I knew I was like growing, improving slowly at everything I was doing. So, yeah, it's frustrating, but it's not like depressing or anything. I was never like overly depressed. I don't think about the situation. So
Mm.
I just kept working at it.
Yeah, sounds like you have a lot of patience.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Maybe too
um,
much. Yeah.
yeah. Do you have any like routines that help you play well, or yeah, show up on the gig, fresh and ready to go?
I've usually, like before a show, I've usually done some playing of some sort, whether it's maybe I've done a rehearsal or another little gig or something, or if nothing else, I've practiced something at home before I went there. So I'm kind of ready to go mentally. I mean, routine wise, I just got to make sure I know when to leave and catch my train in case there's any train problems. I leave enough time, that sort of thing. And then I have a little routine when I get to the theater, but it's nothing, just kind of hang out with some people and warm up the instruments a little bit and get ready to go and get dressed, all that sort of thing. Other than that, nothing really at home, a routine.
Hmm.
Just make sure I'm kind of ready to go.
Hmm. When you're practicing either bass or tuba, do you have a set routine that you follow, like scales and then excerpts or something? Or yeah, what does your practicing look like?
Well, my practicing the last 2 months has been great. I've
Yeah.
actually, I mean, I actually practiced. I probably, when I was doing the show and doing a lot of tuba, I was probably spending more time on bass trombone than tuba practicing, just because I was doing so much tuba playing already with that and My Fair Lady at the time, and so I probably spend even if I warm up on bass trombone, I'm kind of ready to go on tuba. I probably didn't have a great practice routine. I'm hopefully will carry this into the future, but I probably just kind of did quick little warm up things, on tuba or bass trombone or bass. I would practice some excerpts, and I would always, if I have an orchestral concert or something coming up or a chamber music, I would definitely prepare that. I would absolutely go into whatever first rehearsal is just completely prepared. So I would have done that kind of work ahead of outside of Chicago, whatever other things I might be doing, more so than practicing for Chicago, because I started Chicago full time just this past November,
Hmm.
but I played for like the last 8 years, like a lot of shows. I think I counted it probably about 700 shows as a sub before I got the chair. So it's really nothing to worry about there as far as playing. I mean, I concentrate, I do as good a job as I can, but nothing to really freak out about as far as playing the book.
So after, doing 700, probably by now, way more than that,
Yeah,
shows, how do you play consistently night after night?
that's kind of easy. I mean, it's such a great band that you just want to sound. You want to sound great with them. I mean, you want to
Mm.
lock in. I mean, we're lock in with Ronnie Zito's the drummer. He used to play with like Woody Herman and stuff. So I just in the guitar player in front of me he's like the original Van Morrison guitar player. So it's like okay, I'm not gonna do anything poorly. I really focus. And what helps with that honestly is having a double really makes it, I don't know, easier is a good word, but it helps you to kind of focus. You're switching instruments and you got to refocus every time, and that really helps keep your concentration up. I've only done a couple shows with just like bass or something, and it did get boring a lot more quickly. Just and I'm sure the guys that are playing 3 or 4 different instruments, easy for them. But even just 2 instruments, it's easy to concentrate on that. And then I think the funnest. I mean, I love Chicago. I love My Fair Lady. The funnest show I did was my Miss Saigon, and
Mm.
that was like a 5 string electric bass and a kind of a heavy duty classical bass part. I have like 50% of each, and you did not rest the whole show. So that when it was like whatever it was, close to 3 hours, 2 till 2:40 or 2:45 or something, and it just went by so fast because you were focused the whole time. Yeah, and so I think that forces you to really keep your consistency up. And I keep on track of everything physically, so I don't have any problems. I don't get out of shape, obviously, on either instrument because that would start to cause problems too, I suppose. But and it's a fun show because there's different people conduct. There's different conductors sometimes, different actors. So there's lots of different tempos. So there's always some variety. I mean, we don't have any click tracks. Well, I think there's maybe one little click track thing, but it's really just a band playing time. It's fun to just concentrate and play in the group. You're making music on your own in a way, so it's kind of easier to be consistent, I think, in that sort of situation. For me, I appreciate that more.
Hmm. Yeah, I've talked to people who don't play theater, other musicians who don't play theater, who are really into like orchestra stuff or whatnot, and they can't imagine playing the same show for months on end. And for me, I don't. There's something like kind of comforting, and like you go in and you know the book and what's going to happen. I mean, unexpected stuff does happen, of course, because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
live. But there's something, I don't know, that consistency. It's nice sometimes just to go in and just play the book and go home.
yeah. And I mean, it's a challenge just in itself. It's a challenge to do everything the way exactly you want to do it. Not. I
Mhm.
mean, obviously, you don't want to miss notes or play out of tune or anything like that. But it's a challenge to not do anything and play with really good time feel and all that stuff. So it's
Mhm.
yeah. And I understand. I get that a lot. Even like I have some serious like some well-known my classical people. They're like, how do they almost sort of making fun of me, but not really, nicely. Like, how do you
Uh-huh.
play the same thing every night? They're used to playing these either different string quartets or orchestras or the Philharmonic or something, doing a different program every week. I thought it would have bothered me more than it does. I'm really totally, so far, I'm totally cool with it. I went a lot of years not doing shows. So maybe if I did it for 30 years in a row and just a handful of shows, then maybe I would get bored. But so far so good. I can't complain.
Mhm.
I don't have a problem. I'm not bored there. I like it. So I take off a lot. I take off plenty. I have good subs, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I could have played Phantom of the Opera for like what is it, 25 years or something, but
yeah. Well, they've gone through a couple of bass players, but I know like Melissa Slocum is the bass player there now. So,
Mhm.
but I don't know. I don't know how much. Yeah, some people don't sub out as much and are able to do that more, and others like sub out the max, like 50% of the shows they're gone just because that's all they can handle. So everybody kind of has their own way of dealing with it. I have enough other stuff that I love doing, and I take off. when I come back, I'm totally happy to be there. I take a vacation or something with my wife, come back, it's great. So far it seems to be working well with how much time I'm there and how much time I'm not there. So,
Hmm. Are there any other shows that have like a bass and tuba or bass and bass trombone double? What other shows do that?
well, there's none with bass and bass trombone. I think there was one show. No, I'm not sure. I don't think there's any with bass and trombone. That would be nice, but because I would definitely get that one, I'm sure. But well, one just closed. Frozen just closed, but there's a handful with tuba and bass trombone doubles. There's a bunch of those. At My Fair Lady, they had the original orchestration, and that was actually there was one first bass, just playing bass, and then the second book that I subbed on like all the time was kind of half tuba and half bass.
Hmm.
And then I've done a couple other. There's like a couple newer reductions. I've done a reduction of Annie. I've done a reduction of Ragtime, where they really cut down to like just like a dozen musicians, and those happen to be also tuba and bass. But I think they'll probably find they're going to have to split those up most of the time anyway, because there's less and less people that do that double. It's kind of an old school double.
Hmm.
So it's generally, unless somebody is specifically looking to do Chicago, they're not going to really do that double. I mean, I just happened to always play brass and bass, but that's not, that's unusual.
I've had some teachers over the years like recommend like buying just a cheap tuba, and learning
Right.
it, and I'm like, I don't know if it's really worth it unless you're maybe super committed. Like I don't know if I've ever been turned down from a gig because I didn't play tuba.
Yeah. And I think it's tougher, slower to learn, and less likely to really be good on a brass instrument. It's not easy, but you can get by with a really easy bass part if you're a talented musician, if you've worked a certain amount on bass, as long as there's nothing too terribly difficult about it. You're not going to sound great, but you can get by. If the main concern is like if they're really concerned about the tuba, and then you just need, like My Fair Lady, honestly, they really wanted the tuba and the bass. They just wanted to get by on that. So, but yeah, it's tougher to go to learn the brass instrument, I think.
How do you grow, right? How do you keep your playing from getting stale?
Well, I still feel like I'm not settled. Like I always feel like I still want to improve stuff. I go through streaks. Maybe for the last few years, I focused more because my newest double or whatever was bass trombone. I really focused a lot on that, and that was keeping my brain fresh for everything else. And that actually helped me even do some stuff on tuba. Maybe my reading got a little bit better, things like that. Just, I still just want to improve. And even now that I have all this time, I'm even 2.5 months into it. I'm still as more focused probably than I was 2 months ago, trying to improve stuff. I've actually been finding stuff that I've gotten slack at over the last years, like on my bass playing, I was getting just listening to myself getting frustrated, like how sloppy my string crossings had gotten over the last bunch of years. And I haven't really noticed it because I'm playing in orchestras or with other, and there's cello section. I don't really hear it. But
Hmm.
when I'm doing some of this, I'm going through trying to do a couple of these movements from like Bach cello suites or something. I'm like, wow, that has gotten really sloppy. So I'm really trying to work hard. But yeah, just really just keeping your brain moving, trying to improve whatever you can improve musically. And then outside of that, my wife is wonderful. We do as much as we can together. I still play a lot of tennis. I try to keep in shape physically. All that sort of stuff kind of keeps my brain and body active, I think, so far.
I think working on things that are harder than like what you need for your job, right? Like you mentioned Bach. So for people listening who aren't musicians, like Bach is pretty difficult.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the top tier of technique and musicality. And so I think I found when you work on things that are harder and like you build more technique than you actually need to play, like spam a lot or something,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
then that helps like consistency a lot. I think when you kind of have an overabundance of technique and musicality at your disposal.
Right. 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 Yeah. I mean, for Chicago, there's very little arco, and it's if there is, it's some there's a decent amount of whole notes and stuff, but there's nothing challenging. And there's one piece that's like 15, 20 minutes long sometimes, but that's all pits. You're playing the whole time. So you just got to make sure you're in shape for that, have a callus and that sort of thing. But the bass book is not like super, super difficult technically. So that alone is not enough to challenge. So definitely bass wise, it's all the other things that I'm doing keeps that going really.
So, what advice would you give to young musicians who maybe have just moved to New York City and want to be on Broadway?
I mean, there's like the playing side and the show prep side. Like playing, obviously, you when you're young and learning, you want to feel comfortable. If you're looking towards doing that thing, you want to feel comfortable, like very good, like classically and styles of jazz and type of thing. More all styles. If you're planning on doubling, or it seems like that's if you're like a woodwind player or a low brass player, you really want to get one instrument first, like really strong, and then build the other up to it. I think the most important thing is stuff that comes more with experience, like outside the practice room, but you can work on it to some extent in the practice room. Is just the time feel is like kind of like the most important thing, especially on the for us. Even I find it classical, people appreciate my solid time feel. Just because I'm kind of jazz and classically oriented, I'm always thinking of that. But having that super solid where you're kind of like the conductor counts it off, you want to be able to lock right in with that time, and plus make adjustments as necessary to whatever's going on. But you really, to some extent, you don't have to be a leader, but you have to be right on it. You can't be hesitant. You got to feel confident that you're popping it right on. Broadway wise, your first experience is going to be as a sub. I mean, there's just almost no other way around it. As far as that, you just want to be over prepared to play that show. These days you're gonna get a conductor's video, most likely. Not for Chicago. We don't do that for our subs because we're such an old show. But other shows, you get a conductor's video, you get the part, all this stuff, and you really just you want to be so prepared that it's maybe the last couple times you go through the show, it's almost kind of boring because you know it so well. So you're just
Hmm.
you just want to be ultra prepared. And then once you get there, it just personal wise, you just want to be courteous and respectful, as friendly as you can be. I mean, I'm not a super outgoing person, but I'm try to be nice to everybody, but I'm not like the bubbly one. I'm not the center of attention, anything like that. But talk to them, take interest in what they do, that sort of thing, just so they kind of know you, get to know you at least a little bit. They have a feel for you and have some respect for your, want to be around you outside of just being a great player. So that's always helpful.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Zach Rimbold.